of us, as you saw my reference to across the pond, exactly, for some of us over here to get to understand a bit more about how things are in the USA, not least because, as we'll hear, I'm sure later on, that things have taken a huge move forward in the last few months. Now, I'll just say, first of all, this is my version of a fireside chat. So I'm sort of, I know you're just starting your day over there. So
I am. Good morning.
There were three things that I was really hoping to get out of the time with you today. What for me was a little bit about getting to know the NDIA and yourself a bit better. Of course, I've met you a couple of times in recent months and things. So so people can get to a better understanding about what you're doing there. Something around looking for sort of similarities and differences that might exist between the US and the USA, either in terms of the kind of work that you're involved in, or in physical or cultural differences that might might be worth just exploring. And then there was something also about I suppose being completely selfish, was this idea about you have moved on dramatically, and whether there is something that we can learn from you. What really worked well for you, and which areas would you have spent less time on or more time on in the future? Does that sound okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. So you've got a long history in this area too. So over to you. Tell us a little bit more about Angela Siefer and the NDIA.
Yeah, sure. So NDIA, we've been around about 7 years. We're the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. I and others got this organization started because we saw that federal policy was being made that would impact the work of local digital inclusion practitioners. And by local digital inclusion practitioners, we mean community-based organizations, libraries, housing authorities, local governments, others who are working specifically on helping folks get access to affordable home broadband service, helping them get a device that meets their particular needs, having access to digital literacy training, tech support, digital navigation, someone who can help them figure out all of those things. That this work was happening on the ground and policymakers had no idea it was happening on the ground. I actually had someone say to me just a couple of days ago that we defined the field. And I think that's accurate, that the field was there. Folks were doing the work. We had nothing to do with that. But what we did is say, you are a distinct group and the federal government needs to hear what you are doing because they're making policies that impact your work. And so that's what we did. We now have NDIA. We are a unified voice for digital equity in the United States. So all of these organizations that do this work, they are welcome to join NDIA, be part of our community. We are very much a community. Folks help each other, learn from each other. NDIA as an organization hears what's happening and learns from that on the ground experience and expertise. And we take that information to policymakers. Sometimes those policymakers actually do something with that information, make some changes, and whatever the policy ends up being, we take that back to the folks in the field because it's impacting their work. And as we all know, policymakers sometimes talk in language that doesn't make sense to regular people. So sometimes we do some interpretation. What does it mean for you on the ground? How does this actually impact your work? How can you make the most of it? If something's not right, how do you express your opinion to the federal government about that thing? I've been doing digital inclusion related work. We haven't always called it that, right? There's lots of words for this work, but I've been doing work in this realm. We just had to do some calculations for another project, and I was like, cool, my oldest child is 24, and I started right about the time he was born. So 24 years ago, started this work, and it's changed a lot. And one of the things that is really clear is that it's not going anywhere. Like how the work's going to keep changing because the technology keeps changing. But this idea of bridging the digital divide is false. We may bridge a divide, but another one's going to pop up. Bridge that one. As long as there's inequality, that's a tough one to try to get your head around. But as long as there's inequality, you and I will. Unfortunately, there's a little job security in that.
Yeah. No, I hear. One of the things that struck me is just how similar we seem to be. And I think we've had the benefit because, of course, we've only been going for a year or so, really. So we've had the benefit of the kind of all of the work that you and others have been doing in this space, you know, in recent years. So our kind of work streams, for instance, very much mirror yours. But people have said the same thing to us. They've talked about we have this ambition, which is to end digital poverty by 2030, and we also say once and for all. And that's because, you know, there have been lots of people. Exactly, that's exactly the issue. Because there've been lots of goes at this, and what we didn't want to do was to have to all have to come back and do it all again, kind of thing, rather than have a go and see what happens and things. But you're right, people have asked us that same question: is really, you know, is it ever going to go away? And in a sense, I feel like it might. And for instance, if you're thinking about everybody having access to a car or to a TV, I know this is different, but the idea is that it may not be the fastest car or the smartest TV or whatever, but at least you've got at some point with the digital collection an opportunity to begin to explore that.
I think the difference, Paul, is that you don't, once you learn how to drive a car, you know how to drive a car.
Yeah. Huh.
And that the how the car functions doesn't keep changing on you.
Yes.
It is frustrating for lots of folks. Like, we all get frustrated with that. One of our favorite apps will change and we'll be like, whoa, why did it change? Now I don't know how to use it. Just as I was, yeah. So I think that kind of what we need is the systems level change to where those who are creating the new technologies, which is awesome. We want lots of folks to create new fabulous technologies, are thinking about those who have fewer digital skills to be able to use it. And in our communities that we have systems that provide that support. So if you don't know how to use something, who do you go to?
Sure.
And for some of us, there's people in our lives that we can go to. For other folks, that doesn't exist. There is nobody in their lives that they go to, or that they can afford to go to, you know, a tech support center somewhere, or call up a tech support center and pay for that service. So where is that place in every community that is trusted, that's in the language that you need, that's culturally appropriate? That's the systems level change. And that's something we're not there yet in the United States.
No, and globally that's true, isn't it? And yeah, I get that. It's a part of the one, it's part of the jig. We talk about it being a jigsaw puzzle. We think that most of the bits there, we know that there are some bits missing, maybe quite big bits sometimes, but also it's very unclear still for us what one of my colleagues says, what the picture on the box looks like exactly, and that's kind of difficult too. But I suppose if what we can do is we can fix bits as we go along, and I agree completely about if you like, the bigger issue, which is that things have to be accessible. Somebody said to us the other day about, you know, how can I make an app, you know, you know, that's kind of current and everything that everybody can use. And we were like, well, do that then. You know what I mean? Otherwise, everything is kind of always accelerating to the front end of all of this, and forgetting completely about the people who are, you know, not in as fast a machine or as faster or as skillful.
Right.
Wonderful, wonderful. I wondered, I suspect from what I've read that the issues that you talk about and that you're dealing with in the USA are very similar. That complexity of the nature, it not just being a device or just about skills, but so many other things as well. But I wonder whether you could say a little bit about the kind of scale of the issue in the USA and the consequences of that as you see them.
Yes, absolutely. So we don't have good numbers on the scale of the issue. We have some numbers that we are like, this is close, so we can use it to help us get there. The numbers we use most often come from our census, the US government census. And those numbers, as of 2 years ago, because they haven't been updated, are that 36 million US households, so not individuals, households, don't have access to broadband service in their homes. And of that 36 million, 26 million of them, I should have looked this up beforehand, I haven't used this number for a while, are urban. So the big point of what we learned from that is that, yes, we have an availability problem in the United States, that folks don't have access to the service to their home that is affordable and that is at the speeds that they need in their home and reliable. But then also there are individuals where it is physically available, they could subscribe to it, but they don't.
Yeah.
And the biggest reason they don't is because and that's not affordable, or it doesn't meet their needs. Why would you pay a big cost for something that doesn't meet your needs?
Yeah.
And then we add on to that the fact that folks don't have devices. So understanding who doesn't have a device. And then the reason this gets more complicated is, well, maybe you have a device, but is it the device that meets your needs?
Yeah.
So you may, in a lower income household, you may have a mobile phone, but are you able to do your schoolwork on that mobile phone?
Yeah.
Could, but do you want to? Right. And then the next piece of that is the digital skills. And we don't have good data on digital skills in the United States at that local level. And we need all of this data that I just mentioned. We need all of this at the local level and at the state level so that resource allocation and programming can occur. So some communities have started doing this themselves, started their own surveys in order to gather that data so that they can figure out where's the greatest need, what is that need, and how do we address it?
Right. Well, fascinating. Every time we talk, I feel that similarities are so much there. The research has been really, there's been a paucity of research here in the UK for sure. It's absolute. We're in the process at the moment of developing what we call the UK evidence review, when we're looking at the evidence and the research that's out there, not least because sometimes some of the reports you see are not really based on real evidence, and yet these recommendations are being made. And we need to make sure that recommendations are linked to into things. So the you're not having good numbers is a big issue in the UK until pre-pandemic. And you and I are going to talk a little bit later, I think, about pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. But pre-pandemic, one of the major surveys over here would talk about something like 97% of the UK having access to broadband, and something there about definitions. What does access mean? Having access to doesn't mean you've actually got it. And then the other thing is, I dug down into that, and the question they actually asked, and by the way, this is a question that the World Bank uses to assess digital access globally now too, is have you at any time in the last 3 months access the internet? And that's the end of it. And so of course 97, but yeah.
As if that's enough.
Yeah,
I don't know about everybody else. I use it every day.
Yeah, kind of thing, And it doesn't say where you're using or what the quality of that, or whether whether that interaction was to achieve what you wanted it to do, and all of those kind of things. And so I've seen, particularly post-pandemic, when suddenly the highlight on this has come much sharper now, that people are, that the research organizations are gearing up, they're getting much more of that, what we would call granular data, as you say. But again, that's very much happening at what we're finding as local authorities, for you, state level, I guess, are much more focused on their own populations, and therefore trying to understand their own populations better.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Good. So could you say a little bit more about pre-pandemic and post-pandemic? Because one of the things we'll also talk about is the recent announcement about grants for I think £65 billion or something. But we'd be fascinated to hear more about that. But was that a pandemic response, or was it in the making for some time pre that?
Yes. So prior to the pandemic, NDIA and others have been working on a Digital Equity Act. So the act existed. It was in both of our chambers, and it hadn't gone anywhere. Nothing had happened with it. And I'm sure you all had the same experience that we had when the pandemic hit. Everybody said, "Oh, the digital divide is real."
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
I'm sure that was universal. Right? And so when that was happening, our community, the folks who are doing that work on the ground, all of a sudden found recognition of their work. More partners wanting to talk to them. NDIA experienced the same thing. And the federal government started to wake up to this being an issue. And it led to, amongst all the, you all know how this works, right? The craziness of politics and whether something happens or doesn't happen in your legislative body. But it got to the point where there was bipartisan effort for infrastructure in general, right? So infrastructure in general, And then broadband's a piece of that infrastructure. So that was great success. But then inside that, so that broadband piece is mostly that 65 billion dollars is mostly for broadband deployment.
Yep.
So to the US's rural areas that don't have service. And then inside that 65 billion is 2.75 billion for digital equity.
Yep.
So this is that language that NDIA and others had worked on a couple years back, that you work on something like that and you're like, God, wouldn't this be great? And you're like, what are the chances?
Yep.
But it happened. Like it finally there was enough attention. The pandemic did it really. I don't think we'd be here if it wasn't. You and I, like none of this would. The pandemic got folks on attention on it. And that led to it being included. And it was able to be in a bipartisan kind of space where we had support from both sides in the US, such that when other things were getting cut, the digital equity piece was not getting cut. And in fact, we thought it was going to be a million number and it ended up being a billion number.
Wow.
So that was quite astounding.
Yes.
But I also want to caution everyone that this is 2.75 billion it's a limited, it'll be gone in the next 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
And so, as we mentioned earlier, this problem isn't going away. So now we're trying to figure out what's a sustainable source of funding, because we need that support on the ground, helping folks figure out connectivity devices, digital literacy. Yeah. It has to be in every community, and they need to get paid for that. Like the idea that it's just a bunch of volunteers.
Yes.
No, it's not volunteers. It's people who this is their job to do this. So our next plan, we actually just announced it yesterday, is airwaves for digital equity. And it's the idea that spectrum auction money, a portion of that could be used and go into a digital equity fund.
Right.
So we're celebrating the 2.75 billion. We're figuring out how to make the most of it. And at the same time, figuring out how we can have more sustained funding for this work.
Yeah. Brilliant. Sustainability is absolutely the case. I agree completely. And because this is not something that goes away, not least because that broadband piece is a recurring cost, and it's not inexpensive for the families that are struggling the most, as you say. So we're looking at different models for that, and absolutely look forward to learning your experience. We have the advantage, if you like, of you trialing things and finding things that work and not work and things. So a place to be learning from. And I also really like the idea of your digital navigators idea, which we rely so much in the UK at the moment on just some really goodwill in the communities. And one of the things I loved about the pandemic was the way the communities responded to neighbors and friends and schools and others that were really struggling and things. One downside of it for me was it was a bit of a blunt instrument at times, the response to it. And what I meant by that is that what people were doing were providing a laptop they'd had in the bottom of their desk for 10 years and things, and feeling that was enough. And even though we'd celebrate that, because anybody wanting to help is brilliant. What I've been wanting for a long time, and this is one of the things for the DPA, which you've been luckily working on for a number of years now in the NDIA, is this idea of a proper strategic, sustainable response to this issue, so that people remain connected and able to do the things that they need to do in the future. So wonderful.
Your phrase of blunt instrument is great. I'm going to steal that.
Yeah.
I think that's very smart. One of the examples of blunt instruments that occurred in the United States early on in the pandemic was purchasing hotspots and then just distributing them everywhere, and then being really surprised when they didn't get turned on.
Yeah. Yes.
So not good use of money. And it was all super well intentioned.
Yeah. Right.
People just really wanted to help. And so I think this gets at that digital literacy piece.
Yes.
Where that support is coming from. Do you trust who's giving it to you, that they're not going to be spying on you?
Yes.
That they don't have other purposes, that you see the same value in all of that they see in it. And I think the other thing that happened in the United States, it's not part of that, the money that's going to go into the Digital Equity Act, but is just as important to all of this is we have what's called Affordable Connectivity Program. It started out during the pandemic as the emergency broadband benefit. It's now transitioned to It's not exactly permanent, but it's going to last more years than the emergency broadband benefit. We're heading towards permanency, but we're not quite there yet. But that one started out as a $50 subsidy for broadband service. It's now been dropped to a $30 per month subsidy for broadband service. But that's great strides to be able to have a subsidy to support your broadband cost. It's a recognition that one, that's expensive. That's a recognition of that. Two, it's a recognition that it is essential.
Yes.
Participation today.
And as you know, absolutely right. And as governments and organizations and are digitizing their services and things, they need to ensure that the majority, if not all the population, can participate in that. So we talk about it as being a kind of democratic process as well, democracy in the sense of being able to be involved in everything. And I saw one of the comments just coming up just now, which again is part of our discussions over here. I'm sure it has been over there too, which is that it needs to be, broadband access needs to be seen more like a utility. Right. So in the same way as we wouldn't imagine. Essential. There are, absolutely. And there are people in the UK who don't have access to water and electricity, for instance. We still have some hundreds of thousands who are who are without housing or water and things. Still extraordinary. But in the same way as we wouldn't see a family without access to electricity or water, I think increasingly people recognize that broadband needs to fit into that same. How that happens, I don't know. Again, we're lucky in the UK, like you, to have lots of organizations at the moment providing free data and that kind of thing. But again, this has to be something that lasts rather than you know, what happens when the data runs out kind of thing.
Absolutely.
One of the areas we've got some questions building now, so I'll come around to the questions at some point soon. But the one of the other areas for me is that this year for us, we are talking about moving from a kind of listening mode, where what we've been doing is gathering whatever research there's around, listening to exactly the same as you. When we talk about the Digital Poverty Alliance, we talk about everybody, you know, not just the core group of people. We talk about being of a small organization, remaining like that and things. But we're moving from that now into what we call recommendations. So what we're doing is drawing recommendations out of that research and saying that these are the key things that we need to work on, and assigning some kind of responsibility to those. So where does the responsibility for that sit? Sometimes it's going to be local communities, sometimes it's going to be companies, often it'll be national government. And then ultimately that turning into action, again, because what we wanted to get away from, but it's the idea of here recommendations and good luck, you know, here's some recommendations and this is what we propose to do about it. And just like you, we would aim to be doing that through partners, because there are some fantastic organizations out there who are already, you know, very, very able in this space. One of the things we've really struggled with in England, particularly in Scotland, it is different in Scotland and Wales particularly, is about government engagement with this piece. It is one of the things that gets kind of passed from person to person. Nobody really seems to be picking it up at the moment, and there is a lot of individual interest within our members of parliament and others, but and particularly within our civil service. But there is no coordinated response to this issue at the moment. So that's the kind of space we've been filling. I wondered if there was any aspects of business cases that you might have made to the federal government, for instance, that you felt had worked particularly well, because the reality, as you touched on, is that there are savings here too, isn't it? That, you know, this is not just about helping people get online; it's helping government to reduce its capital costs and that kind of thing.
So I feel like we struggled for years with how do we convince people, and unfortunately, I think what happened during the pandemic was it was photos of kids doing their homework in parking lots.
Yes.
I think when you see it in the news and it's real, and hearing from it was a groundswell during the pandemic. Teachers were feeling it. People became more aware, right? When, even if it's their kid doing some schooling online and not all the kids are on there, they're like, where is everybody else? Yep. Oh, they don't have internet.
Yeah.
Right. So that awareness, and I mean, I'm sure your community, same of our community, we all knew this, but nobody else seemed to know it. And it's different to be told it than to experience it. Not that you're the one that didn't have it,
Yep.
Somebody in your world did it, right? In
Yes.
your community,
Yes.
you saw people in the parking lot
Yes.
of where whoever had Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
Because that was how they were going to access work, school, whatever it is they needed to do, because those places weren't physically available anymore.
Yeah.
So there's a part of me, Paul, that when we're always kind of figuring out like what's the right argument to convince people, and then when they say no, and then we got to twist ourselves around to convince them a different way, and they still say no, so we twist ourselves again.
Yep.
They just didn't get it. Our argument was right from the beginning.
Yep. Yeah, beautifully said. No, and I agree. I agree. I think that the argument makes itself at the moment, and I think that and it's not our job to persuade them, if you like. One of the things absolutely we can do is to elucidate this. And I remember one program some time ago was called "Seeing is Believing," and what you can do is to take people to a school that has no internet at all and see the kids struggling, you know, with bits of paper and all these kind of bits and pieces. So there may be, that's a really nice idea, is giving up people an opportunity to experience that for themselves. And I think reality is, we've heard phrases over here like people choosing between data and dinner. And, you know, and that again is because the reality is that for the first time with the research that came out in recent years, particularly Ofcom over here, was the first time it was absolutely clear, and it's kind of obvious to you and I perhaps, but is that there was a link between digital poverty and poverty. Of course, accepting that, you know, motivation and other things like that are equally important, but between poverty. And so these families are struggling with so many other things that actually finding even a tariff of £10 a month, which might be specially available, is incredibly difficult for them to find and things. And so thinking about having a day where it's a no digital day. Homelessness, for instance, the homelessness thing, charities over here run this thing where they take MPs and they say, okay, sleep on the streets for a night, see how it feels. And maybe there's something we can do around digital like that too.
That's exactly right. So we've had those kinds of efforts in the US, and the people who you want to feel it the most just won't do it. Right? Like, because they can't exist without it, they don't end up with the experience. And so you end up only doing it with people who already understand.
Yes.
Right. And so that's where I think it is, as much as we can find people in the sphere of those who are influential to share their own experiences. Yes,
hear here. And we heard yesterday from somebody who's, as you say, at the other end of the scale. In fact, is Chief Data Officer at the Cabinet Office here. An extraordinary individual, and he talked about all of his skills and said, yet still, when he looks forward 10 or 15 years, he's scared, because the pace of change in the technology sector is such that he cannot assume that he's going to know what that looks like or how it works years time. So imagine then you haven't even started that process. You know how scary that is. You know that, and that was brought home, wasn't it, with the pandemic, where people were not just scared about not being able to do, you know, things that their kids might like to do, but unable now to see their doctor or be able to sign on for their benefits or to find work or all of other bits. So it's a scary place to be. And one of the things I love about technology and the ability to be able to use that well, and that means the skills and motivation to do it, is it begins to equalize things a little. There's a picture I have in my head of a youngster who is with a laptop and a device and the skills and support and all those other things that you and I would wish for them. There is something at that point, though, that child is the same as any other 14-year-old around, in terms of the access to information and the ability to move their life on and things. We're racing through time at the moment. We've got one of the questions that has just come up, which I noticed, is around to what degree what is the question? How does the relationship with the tech sector in the US work to support the work that you're doing?
Yeah. So previous to the pandemic, it was pretty thin.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
if you would ask me that question, 2 years ago, I'd be like, nothing. Now it's starting to change. NDIA just announced a 10 million 4-year project with Google
I saw that.
put digital navigators
Yeah.
in rural and tribal communities in the US. That's a shift that they would invest that much. That program isn't just about building the capacity of those individuals, but it's to building the capacity of those organizations, changing the relationships in that community, because a digital navigator needs to understand what are the low-cost broadband service offerings, what are the devices, what are the digital skills trainings in my community.
Yes.
And so in the process of that person figuring those things out, they're going to develop relationships with other community organizations and other institutions in their community. So having the tech sector engaged in that kind of a transformation at the local level, but then also model building, because NDIA will be further defining the model as we learn lessons, positive and negative, from that project, and having a large giant like Google as part of that gives us more of a voice to disseminate why we're doing what we're doing, and then what those solutions are, so that others who want to do something good, you all probably got lots of calls like I did during the pandemic. We want to do something, what can we do? And so it provides a more clear path as to one way that they can be helpful.
Yeah. Wonderful. We're very similar experience here. I think that I remember saying to you the other day about seeing the interview with you in 2019, pre-pandemic, and the kind of where you were at that point and where we are both now. One example for us is one tech organization over here provided 10,000 devices. Again, fantastic, 10,000 devices in 2020, but they know that half of those have never been switched on. So there was something about the connection between resource and things and impact, because we're all doing this, aren't we, to change lives, not just to not just to produce more devices and things. And one of the other ones for me, I don't know about you, as far as the tech sector is concerned, is we talked really interesting group yesterday around the idea that this building in of obsolescence into devices has to stop, because I've just got a note from things saying with my computer, which is refurb, I only ever use refurb devices, but it's not fit for purpose for Windows 11. And I'm like, well, it ought to be. I ought to be able to push a button or put something else in it or something, so I can do that, rather than effectively, if I want Windows 11, for that to be able to, for me to have to pack this up or move it on. And that's the other thing about the refurb sector, the circular economy, which is really important for us, for the same for you, I'm sure, in many different ways, is that if you're not careful, devices cease to be being supported by whoever the manufacturer might be fairly quickly. And that means that the device you're handing on is not getting the updates it needs, particularly around safety and security and other bits and pieces. And I would argue that the families we're looking to support and individuals and schools are more in need of that than most, because they haven't got the skills yet developed to be able to go and find their own, virus software or whatever.
It's less likely that somebody in their household is able to fulfill that need.
Yes, here. So I do think that, and also tech companies just helping to ensure that technology is accessible. And I think lots of work's been done on this side, but I know in the UK that the whole accessibility piece is another thing for people, particularly with disabilities and things. There is actually a fantastic range of things, but it's not promoted particularly well, and people are not engaging it. So one of the things for me is seeing people who are disconnected from society, disabled by society, becoming much more enabled to engage, because it doesn't matter, they don't have to go somewhere else to do things. They can just sort of get things, get on with things in their house. When
we talk about the device that meets the person's need, that is intentional, right? It's not just about the laptop versus tablet or mobile phone. It is, does that device have any other support that it needs? Is it a different keyboard? Is it a different mouse? Is the software that's on it the right software for that particular individual? All of that is important. And then it's the disabled community's needs are also different in terms of the trainings. Because then how do you use that certain software for your needs? So I think I appreciate every time it gets raised, because we have to make sure we're not leaving out a whole group of folks.
Yeah. And we certainly too, the nature of our conversations, Tony, we talked in this morning about the tone of our conversation being to say this is, instead of being, it would be really nice if, to start saying it's not really acceptable if you exclude people in this way.
That's exactly
instead
right.
of, people with disabilities are a classic example, but people who are disconnected digitally fall into the same category, where it's the last thought in a plan. It's, oh, wait a minute, what about the people who are not connected at the moment? Let's sort of tack something on the end, rather than making that a kind of integral part of the way that programs and plans and products and things are developed and things. One of the questions I had, which I would say was one of my selfish questions, but I'm pleased to say that somebody's sort of asking it on my behalf, so I don't feel quite so selfish about it, is whether you could say a little bit about pieces of work that are either that you've been involved with or you're aware of that have been going on across the US, that have had lots of goodwill, but really haven't achieved what you wanted to do or what you wanted them to do, and what was your response to that?
Yes,
How did you work around it?
Yeah, so here's a good example. That affordable connectivity program that I mentioned earlier, $30 per month subsidy. Most people using that are using it for mobile service. We would love to see people using it for wireline service. You don't have data caps, it's more reliable. But the thing that low-income household is most likely to already have is the mobile phone with the data service. And so what that program does is allow them to have more data. So that's the choice they make, because that's what they've been using. We need to get to a point where we are supporting both their mobile service and their wireline service. And we're not. So we're still struggling with how the program can make sure that it's covering the wireline service and that people have the full support they also need for their mobile phone. Because those of us who do have resources, we don't choose one or the other. We need both. So why would we ask a low income household to choose one or the other?
Here. Though I quite like the idea that some of the creative, we feel that there needs to be some really creative responses to these things. And is the idea that a phone, if it had enough data, then can become used as a hub for other devices to work off. And actually in the UK, sorry, go on.
I say the problem that we've seen with that is that mom is using her phone as that data hub, and then she goes to work.
Yes.
And then there's no internet in the home.
Yeah.
So it works if you have multiple devices, but it doesn't work if it's the only one.
Yes, indeed. And when you talk about wireline, is that the same? We talk about a kind of landline here, which is a kind of fixed line into our homes.
So cable, fiber, DSL. That's what we mean.
Okay, cool. Absolutely. Because in the UK at the moment, we're also moving in the next few years to a time when landlines won't be available at all. So I mean, for phone lines, and so mobile is going to be the way to go. And so as you say, for the families who've got devices and things, that's fine. But for those who are not, there isn't any plan apparently to kind of support the families in finding an alternative way forward on that side, which is a shame.
And it does get very confusing when you talk about wireless versus wired and exactly which technology you're talking about. I think for us, it's always being concerned about, regardless of what the technology is someone have limited access or full access? So data cap is the best example that limits one's access. So is it unlimited access that is reliable and is affordable? So reliable, satellite, not always reliable, mobile, not always reliable. Sometimes other wireless solutions are more reliable, right? So like it all comes down to what is the most reliable and meets their needs, and it is affordable.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's complicated enough for all of us who feel like fairly comfortable with it in terms of what to go and which packages to go to. And so things like language are really important for us. We've been looking at the way it's talked about. Things like, people around motivation I don't want to go on the internet. It's not really for me. I don't but if it's described to them in ways that help support them, and so we're talking very similarly to you, to the people at the point when they're most motivated, when they go shopping or when they go to the library or something, or they visit their doctor, an opportunity then to say to them, this is what you need to do, and this is how you can get the support you need, and things is what we call trusted faces and trusted places and things. So
Yes.
very similar.
I believe it's New Zealand that elevates trust to the top list of the different solutions.
Yes.
That trust has to be engaged from the beginning, and we haven't elevated it that high in the United States, but we need, I think all of us need, I think New Zealand figured it out first. We all need to be elevating trust, because we know technology is intimidating.
Yes.
So we don't make sure that the message is coming from a trusted source. Unfortunately, government, not always a trusted source. Internet service providers, not always a trusted source. So there needs to be that third entity that is already trusted for some other reasons that don't have anything to do with digital. Absolutely.
We're very lucky. One of the people that I worked with, somebody called Lee Smith, that was a very senior person at Lloyd's Bank, and who did lots of work around this area. And one of the things that we talked about was the development of digital champions. And I remember going to one of the presentations that Lee did at the time, and thinking, because I was thinking very much about devices, because I was brought up with this idea, it's not the device, it's what the device does. And I thought, yeah, absolutely, I get that. However, if you haven't got a device or connectivity, you can't even start that journey. So I started asking that question, what about devices? What about devices? And I sat in that presentation listening to about digital champions and thinking, well, that's the difficult bit done. Apparently in the UK at the moment, we've got something like 1 million digital champions of some fashion or other. These are people who've got some training, an understanding about digital. It may not be as expansive or as broad as we might like it, but we've already got people who've put their hand up and said, I want to help, I can help, and for me, the fact that we already have that, it's not an infrastructure exactly, but it is people across the UK.
But are they paid or are they volunteers?
No, that's exactly what I was coming to. So some of them are paid in the sense that they are digital champions, which they've taken on as a role through their company. So the company has enable them to become digital,
but they also have other duties. They have other duties with it.
Absolutely. And there is, I agree, you brought this up at the beginning, that I agree completely. This is not something we can rely always on volunteers to do, and why should people, and so that's why I quite like the digital navigators plan. And for me, I feel again very lucky that we have you to look at and learn from and things. So what worked, what didn't work. So if we can do the same thing but tweak it this way, it'll be even better.
Yeah, so we can make mistakes.
Yes, yeah, and us too. Hopefully you can learn from us as well. But
yes, we would love to learn from you.
Yeah, good, and not least because we also see something for globally eventually. That's to say that I think this is you and I know this is an issue across the world right now. Yes. And so I'm hoping really that one of the things that the NDIA and the Digital Poverty Alliance might be able to do together as we grow closer together over the next few years is to make that learning available to as many people as possible outside of to governments. We are contacted all the time by other governments and other individuals, and I'd love to be in a position to be able to say we found this worked, or this is where to start. This is yeah, great. So I just want to check to see, because we're now rapidly running out of time already, and you probably a million meetings to get onto. But so that was one more question. Excuse me. What's your view on people in low digital settings? What is your view on people in low digital settings? Are more mobile than wireline folk? Are people moving around more, basically? I'm not sure. Do you understand that? That this is an individual who I know who is really interested in this idea about people being able to remain in touch wherever they are, not just when they're at home or when they're in work or whatever, but they have a kind of... I think
that goes to the fact that I have a mobile phone and I have a computer. Right. Yes. So I have mobile service and I have wireline service.
Yes.
My wireline service is more reliable. Right. That's for me, it's a cable connection coming into my home and then Wi-Fi in my home. That's more reliable than my mobile phone. But do I want to take my mobile phone with me to the grocery store? Yes.
Yes.
But if I need to ask my spouse a question,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So,
Yes. Yes.
so
Yes.
I think the answer is yes, but we can't. I've definitely seen in the United States, like, well, low-income people just use mobile, and where everything's going wireless, let's just go wireless. Well, yeah, can you get rid of the data caps?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Like,
Yes.
if you
Yes.
get rid
Yes.
of data caps, yes, everybody could go, we can all use our mobile phones as
Yep.
long as the connectivity is reliable and it's affordable. But right
Yep.
now, that mobile phone doesn't, if I left my house, how's my family going to connect to the internet?
Yes. Yeah. 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 For exactly the reason you said. And of course, we've had instances in the UK too, where not only is the data run out because it's limited and expensive, but also the phone credits run out. And so they actually, during lockdown, that must have been an appalling place to be, because you can't go out, you can't talk to anybody, you can't see what's going on, you can't find out anything.
We heard a really terrible story. One of our affiliates is a housing organization, and they were trying to help some of the residents in that low-income housing get connected to broadband, but because you couldn't be in person, they needed to talk to them over the phone, but that person had limited minutes on their phone, so they couldn't talk to them on the phone. Yep. Right? So all of those limitations, or even more terrible, a woman saying that she couldn't call her doctor. The doctor was using phone service and she didn't have broadband, but she couldn't call her doctor because she didn't have enough phone minutes. Right.
Yep. And then how disconnected do you feel? That appalling, particularly in America, where I know where you have, huge kind of, well, huge urban areas, but huge rural areas as well, where people maybe many miles from their nearest contacts and stuff. We have that issue on a smaller scale, but still just as important in the UK, where rurality is. So we don't even yet have the infrastructure we need in place. So now I wanted to sort of leave, not necessarily specifically on an upbeat, but as you look forward now, do you, because I know you've been working on this, I think, since 1996, but are you now today feeling, as you look forward, more optimistic about achieving at least some of the inclusion that you would like to see in the US?
Oh, I'm definitely feeling optimistic that the local programs and advocates will finally have some financial support.
Yep.
Some of them already have. Outside of that federal money, there's more philanthropy paying attention, more corporate donations paying attention, more local and state governments paying attention. So because of that financial support, and because there's more people who want to do the work. So NDIA's community tripled during the past 2 years because more people are doing the work than before. We just held our annual conference last week, actually.
Yes.
And we had 350 people in person, about 500 on live stream. And of the people in person, we asked how many people have been to this conference before, and how many haven't. About 2/3 had not. So that shows how the field, because we have them every year prior to the pandemic,
yep,
that shows how the field is changing and growing.
Yes. Yes, yeah, absolutely. And the reality is, one of the early pieces of work we've done over here, and we now have an interactive map which we're further developing, which is to say, actually, there was a bit like that jigsaw puzzle I was talking about, is that there are lots of jigsaw puzzle pieces everywhere. There are certainly gaps geographically, but we want people who are in a particular part of the country to be able to see what's there in their area already, either to identify where there are gaps and therefore other services that need to be provided, or to find that actually there's somebody around the corner. One of the pieces of information that came back to me, which I found was extraordinary, was that something like 65% of the people who were disconnected said that they would look for more digital skills if they knew where to go. And that for me, that was extraordinary, given there are numbers of really, really wonderful organizations over here that have exactly that. It's online, it's offline, it's wherever you need to be and things, and yet people just didn't know where to go. And I suppose the difference for you and I over the last 10 years particularly has been that the technology has moved on, hasn't it? It's been a sort of nice to have, it's kind of helpful for you doing things to absolutely a core part of the way that people live their lives now.
Yeah, it's not an option anymore.
No, they are.
Talk about it as people can make a choice. I don't think they have a choice anymore.
No. Like it or not, absolutely. That's
like it or not.
Exactly. because you know, there are days when, you know, tech is something that we all hate. I know, but sometimes we wish it would go away sometimes, but the
Right.
2 minutes later. One of the last questions I'd like to ask you is, you've talked about this growing community, and absolutely, for me, this community that we have here is brilliant, from really big organizations to say to individuals doing whatever they can and things. One of the things that we've developed a hub which people can come into, because what we wanted to try to do is kind of automate those links as much as possible, because as a small organization, it's difficult to keep that going and making the links where you need to, you know, this health authority meet that health authority, because, you know, you're both in the same sort of place. So have a talk about how have you gone about this bringing together of the community?
Our listserv.
Okay.
It's very high tech.
Okay, great. Well, we're one step ahead then on that one.
I've tried other platforms, and people don't want them. People want the listserv. So we still have a listserv. It's robust. Sometimes it's too robust for some folks, because there's a lot of activity on that listserv. So there's a digest option.
Yes.
But it's also the culture that we've created on the listserv and in our events, both the webinars that we have, but then also the in-person events that we've held, one per year until.
I like that.
That it is a culture of supporting each other. When someone has a resource to share or a question to ask, and they might ask the NDIA staff, and we say, no, do it yourself. You ask, because then or you offer what you have, because then it's a conversation amongst the community members. And it is a really supportive group, and we encourage that support, and we love it, and we celebrate it, because they want to do that work in their own communities in an amazing kind of way, and they want to learn from others, and they'll teach others what they know. At the conference that we had last week, I was worried that maybe we might lose it because we gotten so much bigger, but we didn't lose it. And I was like, it really touched my heart to see folks talking to each other and supporting each other, and lots of hugs, and that it's a very positive place to be, because we all want to address this issue in a positive way. There's not a lot of like, oh, you know, I'm complaints, but rather let's talk solutions. I'll complain, I'll tell you what the problem is, but then let's talk about solutions.
Yes, and of course they're meeting real people in real need and things. And I think that sometimes we have to remember that, you know, yes, while it might be about devices and connectivity and skills and things, in reality it's about moving people's lives on as they want to, as they choose to, and things. And so no, I agree that feels like a really kind of positive place to end. We've got these wonderful organizations out there, bringing them together, because we think that whatever we can do nationally to help to kind of coordinate and add value and provide data and do all the kind of things that you talk about doing at the NDIA as well. Ultimately, it is going to be what happens in local communities that makes the real difference, I think. And
they are the heroes.
Yes, completely right. Completely right. Now, I suspect we've started the whole questions thing more than come to an end of them, and I've seen some fantastic toing and froing on the chat and things, which I'll share. I'll definitely come back to you afterwards, but what I might suggest is we even perhaps try and revisit this in another 6 months or 9 months time, something like that, to see how things have moved on for you and for us. Hopefully our plan this year is to have not just launch our UK evidence review, but for that to turn into the start of a national delivery plan. And that's exactly factoring in all these different aspects to bring together. So 9 months from now, we'll hopefully have more to talk about and more to share and things too.
And can I offer to your community, there's lots of resources on our website, digitalinclusion.org. We are really intentional about making things publicly available. So search it. If you can't find it, ask us. That listserv is open and free, so you can join if you want to hear the US conversation. You're welcome in.
And you get a lot. I'm on, and I've just said that this morning. You're just fantastic, the kind of toing and froing that goes on. That's really that again. Philosophically, we're in the same place too. We absolutely are open and sharing as much as possible. And I'll make sure there's a link to yourselves on our hub and our website and things. Some of the resources that you're working on, which are going to be really helpful for us, is things like definitions, for instance. We haven't even begun to get into that today, but that's another really important area. And I say what we want to do is use the definitions that you've generated over the years and to see whether they resonate well enough with us to help to guide us forward as well, because we need to be sharing that. Otherwise, we could be talking about chalk and cheese, couldn't we? But Angela, it's been a complete delight, and I know I'm echoing because some of the millions of comments in chat and stuff to say that this has been a great learning and interesting experience for me certainly, but for the people who've been listening in today. And I can't thank you enough. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Paul.